You know, they say if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. I don't remember the 60s, or at least when I was in college. Maybe because the school wasn't that great, or I was too young, or I was still waiting to leave. You know, the local college was still the local college. I was still waiting, excuse me, to lead an interesting life. And when I was 20, I graduated college pretty early and found a way to leave. I joined the Peace Corps. And I looked on a map. They asked me where I wanted to go. And I looked on a map, and I sort of went halfway around we still had globes then, and I went halfway around the globe and found a spot which was the farthest spot from my neighborhood before it started coming back. That's how I picked it, you know. How far can I go before I have to start coming back? And of course, it was Asia. Now, growing up in the 60s, some of you will remember, there was an American fascination with India. You know, the Beatles were here. There was something about India having answers. Something about India having answers about certain things, about life, the recycling of life, music. You know, as a kid, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But India seemed to have some answers. So I wanted to go to India. So when I applied for Peace Corps, I wrote down India. Unfortunately, for me, everybody in America, so it seemed, wanted to go to India that year. So the Peace Corps was full up with people who were going to India. So I couldn't go to India. I went to the Philippines instead and had a fascinating experience in the Philippines. But it still wasn't India. I wound up spending 3-4 years in Asia. Peace Corps, I began my journalism in India. I'm sorry, in Asia, actually in the Peace Corps. Spent a lot of time in Thailand and Laos and Cambodia, where I began to actually see the impact of India in terms of its culture on others. And after that, wound up going to graduate school for all kinds of reasons. I was beginning to lead an interesting life. And that life began in Asia. And I spent 100 years in graduate school. I don't know, some of you may understand that. Did a PhD thesis. Actually, for those of you who are still in school, here's an apocryphal story. I met my wife in the library at the University of Michigan. She was gorgeous and brilliant. And she was going for her PhD as well. So I figured I might as well go for my PhD. What the heck? And I did. But I didn't finish. I stopped 2 chapters short of my dissertation. And of course, my wife did finish. So for the past many years, I've gone through life as, and we would go in and be introduced. It would be, my wife's last name is Beebe. So it would always be Dr. Beebe and Mr. Nussbaum. And this has been my punishment for not finishing my dissertation. But all along, through graduate school, after Asia, I was leading an interesting life. I wound up working at Business Week because it was basically the only job I could get when I got out of graduate school. There weren't any really good jobs in academia at that time. And it's fortunate because I would have made a terrible academic. I don't have patience. I'm fairly shallow. I was actually the perfect journalist. It's true. And I'm impatient, so I go from thing to thing to thing to thing. I could say, you know, it's a function of my curiosity, which it is, but it's really a function of my impatience as well. So, because I was a serious boy, I started covering political economy, economics, finance, international economics, traveled around the world, Never made it to Brazil, sorry, but I made it to Buenos Aires several times. I was leading an interesting life. And then I got involved in design. I was on a plane coming back from Zurich, I think. It was late at night. Everyone was asleep. I had my glasses off, and all of a sudden, something hits me in the face, and I wake up, scared. It's liquid, and I can't quite see what's going on. I put my glasses on, I turn the light on, and I see in front of me other people are waking up, like this, and they're all going like that. I'm looking down, and I see a little figure running down the aisle, and every time the figure passed some person in the seat, the person jumped up. And it's really terrifying, I'm still half asleep, and the little figure turns around and starts coming back at me. And people are twitching and jumping and waking up, and finally I see it's a little girl who, I don't know, was 3 or 4, and she had in her hand a little milk bottle. And it was something I'd never seen before. It had a hole in it. It was a donut. And she had her little hand on one side of this bottle, and she was squirting the adults, and then she would feed herself. And she was laughing and having a great time because she was torturing the adults and feeding herself. And that was my design epiphany. I thought, who designed that powerful weapon for this little girl? Because a regular bottle, she would have had to have gone, but this little thing was up. So I went back to Business Week and found out who designed it and wrote a story, and we had a huge response from our readers. People wrote in, where can I? And this was sort of, I guess, in the 80s, and we got telexes from Taiwan wanting to know where they can knock it off. So, and that began my other journey in leading an interesting life into design. And while at Business Week, basically they paid me to cover international economics, and for a while I was head of the editorial page. My real interest was in design and explaining design to the business world. That was my specialty. I was at a business magazine learning about design, understanding the power of design, and explaining it to a business culture that didn't quite get it, with a few exceptions. And over the years, as design changed from being able to design a thing to designing an experience, an engagement, now design can design social systems, education, health, stores. Some of the best designers are not in design. They're in other areas, as we're discovering. But I was leading an interesting life. And design, innovation, creativity have sort of led me on this journey. And now I'm at Parsons, working with some brilliant people like Carlos, who've brought me back to India, where I tried to come many decades ago, to continue my journey on learning and leading an interesting life. And as this morning showed, and I'm sure this afternoon and the rest of the conference, I'm continuing to lead an interesting life and learn an awful lot. This thing about dreams, I have to tell you, is a breakthrough for me. It's really the next iteration in understanding people and their motivations and their aspirations. And I'm really hopeful that we can create a structure that takes those dreams and harnesses them and allows us to make them happen. And that would be a wonderful goal for a person trying to lead an interesting life. Thank you.